predicting where these players end up in free agency. We're starting to hear news about what teams and players are going to do given that free agency is right around the corner. So I'm going to give my predictions for where I think a bunch of these players are going to end up this offseason. Number 1 is LeBron James, and I think LeBron ends up back with the Lakers. I think everything is pointing towards him re-signing with the Lakers and getting a deal done, and probably I think they will try to draft Bronny if he's still there when their draft pick comes around. I feel really confident that if Bronny is there, like I said, they're going to draft him. And I think LeBron's staying and the father-son duo happens. If you want to see a video on me making bold NBA free agent predictions, like where players go, I almost did that today, but I'm like, let me give my opinion on what I think actually is going to happen. And if you guys like this video and you like that idea, let me know in the comments down below, and then I'll do a video with my bold predictions where I think is a possibility the player could go a certain place, but I don't think it's necessarily the first option, but it is a fun option. Number 2 is James Harden. James Harden actually has gotten kind of forgotten about, in this free agency, given the Paul George thing and Klay Thompson and OG Anunoby and just all the other names that have been out there. People have kind of forgotten James Harden is a free agent. And I saw a report today that he's waiting to see what happens with Paul George and what he does and stuff like that before he makes his decision. And that sounds like something Harden would do. And I'm not saying that in an insulting way. I'm saying he always seems to see what the landscape is before he makes his move, which as a business person, I know he's an NBA player, but when you're dealing with business and stuff like that, you always want to see the landscape. So he definitely always does that. I think if Paul George stays, he stays. I think he likes the team, the Clippers, everybody that they have on the team. I think he likes being in LA. We know he likes to have fun off the court. And I just think if Paul George stays, he stays because it gives him a chance to also win at the same time. But if Paul George leaves, which is the scenario that a lot of people think is going to happen, I think James Harden ends up in Phoenix. And that could be categorized as a bold prediction for my bold predictions video if I make that video. But the reason I feel like he ends up in Phoenix if he leaves the Clippers is based on him not wanting a large deal, and I honestly don't think he's going to get a huge deal anywhere. There's actually 2 ways he could do this. He could do a scenario where he gets to Phoenix and he gets more money. We'll talk about that in a second. But the latter option is obviously he doesn't really get any money by going to Phoenix because they have no money to give. The reason I feel and see him going to Phoenix is that he's not going back to Philly, which is one of the few teams that have a ton of money. So we know that's out. I don't see him going to Orlando, who also has a ton of money. I don't think that makes sense. And I don't see him going to the Spurs. I don't think that makes sense either. I feel like the teams where he could or would go don't really have money to give. And I just can see him playing for Phoenix. It's just such a James Harden scenario. And I don't know how to describe why it feels like a James Harden scenario. But if you watch the NBA and you watch James Harden, maybe you understand what I'm saying. It just feels like he's going to end up in Phoenix and he's going to be the point guard. So he's definitely going to have a lot of, being able to do what he wants to do because he will be the clear point guard on the team, which they need desperately on Phoenix. And so he gets to play with KD again. I assume they're still friends. And then Phoenix obviously wants to win now. We know they're not trying to blow it up. They're trying to contend. So if they could get James Harden, add him to the roster with KD, Booker, and Beal, they still need to add depth and stuff like that. But you get James Harden in addition to that, that's pretty nice. One way that this actually could work out, that Phoenix gets James Harden and the Clippers get to continue to compete, so to speak. Again, I do think that James Harden leaves if Paul George leaves, so then that makes the Clippers' plans completely different. But let's just assume it's a world where Paul George stays, but James Harden wants to leave. They could do a sign and trade with Phoenix. And it's going to have to be for Bradley Beal because they're not going to trade Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. at least not for James Harden. So you'd have to take Bradley Beal's contract back. And so I don't know if the Clippers want to do that. But if they're still trying to compete right now and James Harden wants to leave, a sign and trade, at least you get someone of Bradley Beal's caliber back, because the Clippers are always willing to spend money and do what they need to do in order to win a championship. So that could be a scenario, actually. The only problem with that is Phoenix has 0 picks. 0 picks. So they would need to get like a third team involved to somehow get the Clippers, a pick or two. Like, I'm not saying James Harden's going to get like 4 first-round picks, but his value is higher than Bradley Beal's right now. So I think the Clippers would want a pick or two back in return for James Harden, so they would have to get a third team involved, but that's a possible scenario. DeMar DeRozan, he is another one that is going under the radar. People have forgotten that he's a free agent. And while there have been reports about him, like earlier in the season, probably re-signing with the Bulls, and now reports are coming out because of the Josh Giddey trade and stuff like that, it seems like the Bulls are going in a different direction and that he is more or less likely to re-sign. I actually think he's leaving the Bulls. DeRozan is actually really hard to predict where he's going to end up because there are so many teams where I could see him ending up. Like, there are so many teams. I don't think DeRozan's all about money either, so I think he'd be willing to take a pay cut somewhere. I could honestly also see him on the Clippers, but the Bulls are not going to do a sign and trade for James Harden, for example, for DeRozan. That doesn't really make sense for them. Unless DeRozan went to the Clippers on like a really small deal like Russell Westbrook did. I don't know if he's willing to do that, but I honestly could see DeRozan on the Clippers. It's like, it looks so real to me. Another place I could see DeRozan go is Philly. That makes sense to me because we know Philly has a ton of money. They're trying to build their own little big three with Embiid, Maxey, and then possibly DeRozan. That would be a pretty nice, big three right there. Like, again, like James Harden going to Phoenix, same thing. Do I think that makes either of these teams the favorite to win the championship? Not necessarily, but you got to start somewhere. And Philly picking up DeRozan, we know he's a good guy. I can also see DeRozan on the Knicks. Now, I think it's less likely now than it was earlier in the season. I thought it was more likely back then. But I feel like, I don't know, it's not that they're going in a different direction, but like with the Paul George thing, I feel like they would prioritize Paul George over DeRozan if that was a choice, especially because Paul George, if he opts in, it's a 1-year deal and they do a trade and whatever. And DeRozan is a free agent, so they would have to figure out the money and all that stuff. So it could be easier in the sense that they don't have to make a trade with the team, but I don't know. I still could see him on the Knicks. I just feel like it's a little less likely. And the last player is Gary Trent Jr. Now, he is an unrestricted free agent, and I was thinking about it for a little bit. I'm like, where could Gary Trent Jr. or where will he end up? Because Gary Trent Jr. is like a very good player and he's still actually pretty young. Like, I think he's 24, 25. Like, he hasn't even technically hit his prime yet. And then it hit me. You know where I think he ends up? The Magic. I feel like it's like, I can't even see him on any other team once I thought of it. I'm like, the Magic, perfect. The Magic need scoring desperately. They have a lot of young guys. They have a lot of good defenders. They have all those things. What they need is scoring. They struggled to put points on the board, especially in the playoffs. Gary Trent Jr. is known for scoring. He's a bucket getter. And he's someone, again, who is still young and in their prime. So he does fit the timeline. Because we also heard a report that they are targeting KCP should he decline his player option. KCP is obviously a champion and a great defender and a 3-and-D guy and brings experience, but Gary Trent Jr. I think fits the timeline better. What a perfect fit. Gary Trent Jr. has to go to the Magic now.